There is a country that wrote pacifism into its constitution, not as a political position, not as a temporary posture, but as the supreme law of the land, enforced for 8 decades without interruption. That country lost a war so completely and caused so much destruction getting there that its new government renounced war itself, in writing, forever. That country is Japan. And right now, quietly, methodically, and with a budget that is doubling in real time, Japan is building one of the most sophisticated military arsenals on Earth. This is not a story about a country that stumbled into rearmament. It is a story about a deliberate, decade-long transformation, accelerated by a single document signed in December 2022, backed by tens of billions of dollars, and executed by some of the most capable defense engineers in the world. 20 weapons systems, every one of them built, bought, or redesigned for one purpose. Here is what Japan is fielding, why it matters, and what it tells us about where the Indo-Pacific is heading. Chapter 1. The paper wall Japan's constitution meets reality. For 75 years, Article 9 of Japan's 1947 Constitution was the shortest and most consequential sentence in Asia's strategic order. It renounced war. It prohibited maintaining war potential, and it was written not by Japanese lawyers, but by American occupation officials who wanted to make certain the Imperial Japanese military could never reassemble itself. It worked for a while. Japan spent the Cold War hiding behind that clause and behind the American security umbrella, keeping defense spending informally capped at 1% of GDP, an unofficial ceiling so consistent it became almost a physical law. The self-defense forces, as the military was carefully renamed, were structured to be exactly that: defensive, limited, legally cautious. Then, the environment changed faster than the doctrine could absorb. China modernized its military at a pace that shocked analysts. North Korea tested missiles over Japanese territory. And in December 2022, Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's cabinet released 3 interlocking documents that changed the legal architecture of Japanese defense in a single afternoon. The National Security Strategy, the National Defense Strategy, the Defense Build-Up Program. Together, they authorized something that had been formerly unthinkable since 1945: counterstrike capability. The right to hit back at the source of an attack before the second missile is launched. Masahiro Sakata, former head of Japan's Cabinet Legislative Bureau, described it plainly. He called it the death of Article 9. The money followed immediately. Japan's defense budget stood at roughly $35 billion in 2022. Under the 5-year build-up program, it is projected to reach approximately $60 billion annually by 2027. In December 2025, the cabinet approved a defense budget exceeding 9 trillion yen, more than $58 billion, a 9.4% increase in a single year, the 4th consecutive record. Japan is now the 9th largest military spender in the world. That is the political architecture. Now for the weapons. Chapter 2. Island Killers, the Missile Revolution No One Saw Coming. The first weapon you need to understand is not flashy. It does not fly at hypersonic speeds. It does not carry a pilot, and it was not built in the last 5 years. But its transformation tells you everything about what Japan decided to become. The original type, 1-2 surface-to-ship missile, entered service with the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force in 2012. Range, approximately 200 kilometers. Enough to defend the coastline, not enough to threaten anything beyond it. It was the perfect weapon for a country that had legally committed itself to never threatening anything beyond its own borders. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries then re-engineered it from the inside out. The upgraded Type 1-2, funded by Japan's 2022 rearmament surge, and allocated 177 billion yen, over $1 billion, in the fiscal 2026 defense budget alone, extends that range to approximately 1,000 kilometers. That is not an incremental improvement. That is a fundamentally different weapon wearing the same name. It has been redesigned for reduced radar cross-section, improved terminal guidance, and multi-domain launch capability, meaning it can be fired from the ground, from ships, and eventually from aircraft. On the 31st of March 2026, the Japan Ground Self-Defense Force deployed the system to Camp Kengun in Kumamoto Prefecture, a year ahead of the original schedule, and simultaneously redesignated it the Type 25 surface-to-ship guided missile, Japan's first domestically developed standoff weapon in operational service. The ship-launched variant, the Type 17, already operates from Maya-class destroyers with a 400-kilometer reach in its current configuration. An air-launched version for the P-1 maritime patrol aircraft is in development. The same basic weapon is being woven into every domain of Japan's order of battle. That 400-kilometer ship range is already a threat, but 1,000 kilometers from the ground rewrites the geometry of the Western Pacific. That same geometry also had a different answer, developed in secret. The hypervelocity gliding projectile, officially labeled an island defense system, is in practice Japan's first functional ballistic missile. It works by using a rocket booster to push a glide vehicle to the edge of the atmosphere, then releasing it on a hypersonic descent trajectory. The combination gives it the speed of a ballistic weapon and enough maneuverability to defeat conventional interceptors. The initial Block 1 variant is estimated at 8 to 9 meters in length, with a range of around 900 kilometers. Block 2, currently under development, is designed to exceed 3,000 kilometers. That range covers effectively the entire Western Pacific from Japanese launch points. Japan conducted a live-fire test of the system in California in March 2024. In March 2026, the same week as the upgraded Type 1-2 deployment, it was formally fielded at Camp Fuji in Shizuoka Prefecture and redesignated the Type 25 hypervelocity gliding projectile, entering operational service alongside its stablemate, two domestically developed standoff weapons, deployed simultaneously on the same day. That timing was not accidental. A separate weapon program sits above both of them on the threat spectrum. A domestic hypersonic cruise missile, distinct from the glide vehicle, with a projected range of 2,000 to 3,000 kilometers, scheduled for completion by 2031. Then, in April 2025, Japan contracted Mitsubishi Heavy Industries to develop yet another system, a new long-range precision missile capable of functioning in both anti-ship and land attack roles, a single weapon that crosses domain boundaries. The program does not yet have a public designation. It does not need one to matter. The missiles were the revolution. The delivery platforms came next. Chapter 3. Borrowed Thunder. The American arsenal Japan made its own. Not every weapon in Japan's new arsenal was built in Kobe or Nagoya. Some of it was bought, rapidly, deliberately, and in quantities that signal intent rather than precaution. In January 2024, Japan ordered 400 BGM-109 Tomahawk land attack missiles from the United States. 400. At a range of approximately 1,600 kilometers per missile, that is the largest single purchase of a land attack cruise missile by any non-NATO country in the weapon's history. The Tomahawks are being integrated into Japan's existing Aegis destroyer fleet and eventually into the new warships currently under construction. A country that legally prohibited offensive weapons for 8 decades just bought 400 cruise missiles. The acquisition the Tomahawk pointed toward came before it, in the air. Japan's F-35A Lightning II entered Japan Air Self-Defense Force service in 2017, built under partial license by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries at the Komaki plant, gradually replacing the aging F-4EJ Phantom and F-15J fleets as the primary land-based multi-role strike aircraft. In 2019, the National Diet approved the full procurement package, 105 F-35A aircraft for conventional land-based operations, plus 42 F-35B short takeoff and vertical landing variants for a purpose that will take an entire chapter to explain properly. 147 fifth-generation stealth aircraft in total. When fully delivered, Japan will be the third-largest F-35 operator in the world, behind only the United States and the United Kingdom. The F-35A is being integrated with the AGM-158 JASSM, an air-launched cruise missile with a range exceeding 900 kilometers, deployable from both F-35S and existing F-15 airframes. Alongside it, the Norwegian Joint Strike Missile, the JSM, with a range of approximately 500 kilometers, adds a third air-launched standoff option specifically designed to fit inside the F-35's internal weapons bay, preserving its stealth profile during the attack run. 3 air-launched standoff weapons, 1 stealth aircraft. Configured for strikes no adversary radar can reliably detect until after the weapons are already in flight. A missile with no wings of its own still needs something to carry it, and 1 weapon class in Japan's arsenal will carry nothing but information and reach places no fighter can. Japan is also developing a domestically produced submarine-launched counterstrike missile scheduled for operational deployment in 2027. The platform carrying it will be the most capable submarine Japan has ever operated. The Soryu class, built between 2005 and 2019 inches 12 units, was already among the most capable diesel-electric submarines in the world. At 84 meters long, displacing 4,200 tons submerged, each boat was fitted with a Kockums Stirling air-independent propulsion system sourced from Sweden, allowing weeks of submerged operation without surfacing. The hull was clad in anechoic coating. The interior was acoustically isolated. The X-shaped rudder, the same configuration developed for the Swedish Gotland class, gave it extreme maneuverability at depth. The Taigai class replaced it and improved on it in the one area that matters most underwater: silence. The first Taigai class boat, JS Taigai, commissioned in March 2022, cost approximately 80 billion yen per hull and made Japan the first country in the world to field lithium-ion batteries in an operational attack submarine. No other nation had done it. Lithium-ion provides higher power output, greater submerged speed and range, and crucially, a lower acoustic signature than lead-acid batteries. The Taigai can remain submerged for up to 1 month in power-saving mode. It carries the new Type 18 torpedo and the UGM-84L Harpoon Block II anti-ship missile with a 248-kilometer reach. 10 Taigai-class boats are planned. 5 have been commissioned. A 6th was launched in October 2025. When the domestically developed submarine-launched cruise missile integrates with this class in 2027, Japan will possess a survivable second strike architecture. The ability to absorb a first strike and still respond from beneath the surface of the ocean, from a position no adversary can locate. Chapter 4. Sea Control, the destroyers, and the carriers Japan said it would never build. The surface fleet, is where Japan's doctrinal transformation becomes impossible to interpret as anything but offensive in ambition, even as officials continue to use the word defensive in every press release. Start with the warships that have already arrived. Japan's existing Aegis fleet of 8 destroyers across the Kongo and Maya classes has given the country one of the most capable ballistic missile defense networks in the region for over a decade. Maya-class destroyers already carry the SM-3 Block IIA interceptor, capable of destroying ballistic missiles in the mid-course phase outside the atmosphere. Co-developed with the United States at a cost of over $1 billion per production run. But the Maya class is not the future. The Aegis system-equipped vessel is. In December 2023, Japan approved construction of 2 new purpose-built warships, officially designated the ASEV class, designed from the keel up around Japan's expanded offensive and defensive requirements. Each ship will be 190 meters long, 25 meters wide, with a standard displacement of 12,000 tons, significantly larger than the Maya class at 8,200 tons. Each will carry 128 vertical launch system cells, 64 forward and 64 aft, matching South Korea's Sejong the Great class as the highest VLS cell count of any destroyer currently afloat, exceeding the Chinese Type 055 cruiser by 16 cells. Those 128 cells will not sit empty. They will carry SM-3 Block IIA and SM-6 surface-to-air missiles, Tomahawk cruise missiles for land attack, upgraded Type 1-2 anti-ship missiles, and the Glide Phase Interceptor, a system under joint U.S.-Japan development specifically designed to intercept hypersonic glide vehicles. The class of weapon Japan itself is now deploying on land. The ASEV program is itself a consequence of a canceled system. Japan originally planned to deploy Aegis ashore, land-based missile defense launchers on Japanese territory. In 2020, local community opposition killed the program before a single launcher was installed. The ASEVs are the mobile alternative. The same capability, floating, dispersible, and impossible to politically veto once built. The destroyers are formidable, but the decision Japan's cabinet made in 2018, formalized in the 2022 rearmament documents, goes further than any destroyer. JS Izumo and JS Kaga were commissioned in 2015 and 2017 respectively as helicopter destroyers. That classification was chosen with legal precision. Japan's interpretation of Article 9 at the time barred fixed-wing carrier aviation, so the ships were categorized as destroyer-class helicopter platforms, which was technically accurate and strategically evasive. Both ships were 248 meters long. Both displaced 19,500 tons fully loaded. Both had full-length flat flight decks. They were carriers with a different nameplate. In 2018, the cabinet approved converting both to operate the F-35B. Izumo completed first-phase modifications in 2021, receiving a reinforced heat-resistant flight deck, and in October 2021, U.S. Marine Corps F-35Bs conducted takeoff and landing tests aboard the ship, Japan's first carrier fixed-wing aviation since the Imperial Navy's Shinano was sunk in 1944. Kaga's conversion began in 2022 and was more extensive. The bow was physically reshaped from angled to squared, mirroring the geometry of American amphibious assault ships, with additional structural reinforcement for F-35B weight and maintenance requirements. On the 17th of April, 2026, JS Izumo floated out of dry dock at Yokohama's Isogo shipyard, with its own newly squared bow completed. Both ships are on track for full F-35B carrier operations by 2027. Japan has ordered 42 F-35B aircraft. The first deliveries began to Nutabaru Air Base in Kyushu in fiscal year 2024. By mid-2023 had arrived, with deliveries continuing through 2026. The aircraft are operated by the Japan Air Self-Defense Force rather than the Navy, an institutional arrangement unique among F-35B operators that keeps the program technically within constitutional constraints while producing a functionally identical result. A country that legally renounced fixed-wing carrier aviation now has 2 carriers and 42 stealth fighters to put on them. 128 missile cells at sea, 42 stealth jets above the water. But the fight Japan anticipates begins on the islands before it reaches the fleet. Chapter 5. The ground war. Japan is preparing boots, wheels, and rockets on remote islands. Japan's southwestern island chain, the Nansei Shoto, stretches over 1,200 kilometers from Kyushu toward Taiwan. Most of the islands in that chain are small, sparsely populated, and lack the infrastructure to support heavy armor or fixed air bases. Any military force trying to hold them needs to be fast, light, and capable of providing direct fire support without waiting for tanks to arrive by ship. The Type 16 mobile combat vehicle was built precisely for this geography. Developed by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries and entering service from 2016, the Type 16 is an 8x 8-wheeled fire support vehicle carrying a 105mm rifled cannon, a weapon capable of defeating light armor and fortified positions at combat range. At 26 tons, it is light enough to be airlifted by the Japan Air Self-Defense Force's C-2 transport aircraft, giving ground commanders the ability to put a direct-fire cannon system onto a contested island within hours of an alert. A tracked main battle tank weighs 3 times as much and requires specialized shipping. Japan's FY 2024 defense budget listed procurement of 24 additional Type 16 units, with a planned eventual fleet of 250 vehicles. 250 wheeled cannon platforms distributed across a 1,200-kilometer island chain represents a different kind of deterrence, not a massive armored front, but a web of rapid response firepower too distributed to neutralize with a single strike. The Type 16 is the ground expression of the same doctrine driving every other platform. Reach the southwestern islands faster than any adversary can consolidate, and hold them with organic firepower that does not depend on a rear echelon that might not survive. Wheeled armor holds the ground, but the ground holds nothing if the sky above it is not contested. And for air defense over those same islands, Japan is simultaneously deploying something that operates in a domain beyond visual range. To defend the coasts from above and below simultaneously, Japan is building the SHIELD system, an unmanned coastal defense network integrating air, surface, and underwater drone platforms into a unified surveillance and response architecture, allocated 100 billion yen in the fiscal 2026 budget and scheduled for initial operational capability in March 2028. It is Japan's first deployment of autonomous systems as a primary defensive layer at scale, driven in part by a strategic reality Japan cannot rearmament its way out of: an aging and declining population that cannot staff a traditionally sized military at the scale its ambitions now require. Chapter 6. Sixth Generation, the Fighter. Japan is building to win the next war. Every platform described so far is a procurement decision, something bought, modified, or upgraded. The Global Combat Air Program is different. It is a manufacturing decision, a statement about what kind of defense industrial nation Japan intends to be for the next half-century. On the 9th of December 2022, the governments of Japan, the United Kingdom, and Italy jointly announced GCAP, the Global Combat Air Program. It was a merger of three separate national programs: Japan's Mitsubishi FX, Britain's BAE Systems Tempest, and Italy's parallel next-generation effort. The announcement created a standing treaty-based international government organization with headquarters in the United Kingdom that formally came into existence when the UK ratified the convention in October 2024. The three industrial leads are Mitsubishi Heavy Industries for Japan, BAE Systems for Britain, and Leonardo for Italy. The engine is being co-developed by Rolls-Royce, Japan's IHI Corporation, and Italy's Avio Aero, a collaboration that gives Japan sovereign authority over the propulsion system of its own next-generation fighter for the first time in the country's post-war history. The aircraft is being designed as a tailless delta-wing platform, twin-engined, with radar-absorbing coatings and internal weapons bays. But the airframe is arguably the less revolutionary part of the program. GCAP is being engineered as a system of systems. The crewed stealth fighter will operate paired with collaborative combat aircraft, autonomous loyal wingman drones that can extend sensing range, carry additional weapons, or absorb risk in the opening phase of a high-end engagement. The mission system treats data as the primary weapon. The pilot directs a network. The aircraft is the node. In June 2026, Japan plans to spend more than 160 billion yen, approximately $1 billion, on GCAP development in a single fiscal year. First prototype flight is planned for 2028. Full-scale production begins in 2031. Operational service with the Japan Air Self-Defense Force is targeted for 2035. For Japan, GCAP is also a strategic pivot away from the exclusive aviation partnership with the United States that has defined Japanese military aviation since the F-86 Sabre arrived in 1955. The Mitsubishi F-2, Japan's current frontline fighter, was developed under American oversight, with American intellectual property controls so restrictive that Japan could not export or significantly modify its own aircraft without U.S. permission. GCAP gives Japan full design authority and complete intellectual property access. That is not an incidental benefit. It was a precondition. The aircraft that will replace the F-2 will be designed in Tokyo as much as in London or Rome. It will carry Japanese weapons, Japanese sensors, and Japanese electronic warfare systems. It will be maintained without permission from anyone. The program also carries a historical irony that the engineers in Nagoya know perfectly well. The Mitsubishi X2 Shinshin, a Japanese technology demonstrator that flew between 2016 and 2018 and proved Japan could build a stealth airframe without American help, was the proof of concept that made Japan an attractive GCAP partner rather than a junior client. That demonstrator was built by the same company that built the A6M0 in 1940. 75 years of institutional memory, applied to a sixth-generation fighter, scheduled to fly in 2028. The industry behind GCAP is itself part of the story, and it cannot be understood without understanding how completely it was dismantled and how deliberately it is being rebuilt. Chapter 7. The arsenal remade Japan's defense industry comes back from the dead. When the Imperial Japanese military was dissolved in 1945, the companies that had built its weapons did not disappear. Mitsubishi, Kawasaki, Fuji, IHI, they pivoted to civilian manufacturing under American occupation. producing motorcycles, cars, and industrial machinery from the same factories that had made Zeros and battleships. The technical knowledge did not leave. The institutional structure survived. But the defense production capability was deliberately, structurally, and legally dismantled. For decades, Japan operated with the government as the sole customer for its defense industry in a commercially protected but financially constrained environment. There was no export revenue to fund research at scale. There were no competitive pressures to drive innovation. And from 1967 until 2014, Japan maintained a near-total ban on arms exports, meaning every weapon built stayed inside Japanese borders. And the defense companies that built them could never recoup development costs through global sales. That model produced capable, expensive, low-volume weapon systems. It did not produce an industry capable of competing at the level Japan's new ambitions require. The 2022 rearmament documents explicitly named rebuilding domestic defense industrial capacity as a strategic priority alongside the weapons procurement itself. The fiscal 2026 budget allocated nearly 10 billion yen, approximately $64 million, specifically to defense industry development and arms export promotion infrastructure. Mitsubishi Electric's sale of air surveillance radar systems to the Philippines in 2023 marked Japan's first major defense equipment export, a transaction that would have been illegal a decade earlier. It was modest in scale and enormous in precedent. The Type 16 mobile combat vehicle, the upgraded Type 1-2 missile, the HVGP, and the new long-range precision missile, contracted to Mitsubishi Heavy Industries in April 2025, are not just weapons. They are contracts. They are production lines. They are engineering teams that will still exist in 2035 and in 2045 because the government is now large enough a customer to sustain them, and because export restrictions have been relaxed enough that foreign sales are becoming a viable supplement. GCAP is the clearest expression of this industrial logic. The program gives Mitsubishi Heavy Industries a product it designed, a production run it will execute domestically, and intellectual property it controls. It is the first Japanese combat aircraft developed outside the American partnership framework since before World War II. When Japan builds 100 GCAP aircraft for the Air Self-Defense Force in the late 2030s and early 2040s, the tooling, the supply chain, the workforce, and the institutional knowledge will be entirely Japanese. The weapons described in this video did not appear from nowhere. They are the output of an industrial rebuilding project that began quietly in the mid-2000s, accelerated through the 2010s, and reached full operational expression in December 2022 when 3 documents gave that industry a mission statement, a budget, and a legal framework in a single afternoon. From Article 9 to a $8 billion defense budget. From a constitutional ban on offensive weapons to 400 Tomahawk cruise missiles, 2 carrier-capable warships, a hypersonic glide vehicle in operational service, and a 6th-generation fighter in development with 2 NATO partners. 20 weapon systems across air, sea, land, and the electromagnetic spectrum, each one of them the product of a consistent principle: build what you can build at home, buy what you cannot build yet, and make certain the distinction between offensive and defensive exists in law rather than in capability. Japan has not changed its constitution. It has changed everything else.